2, 3, 4, 5. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, free speech, or abridging the freedom of press, free press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble, to petition the government for redress of grievances, free speech, sing it, free press, free people.
The 45 words of the First Amendment protect freedom of expression for American citizens, but apparently not if they're a student. I went to Puyallup High School in Puyallup, Washington. The publication I wrote for was a limited forum for student expression, meaning we had to meet with our principal and get his approval before we published our monthly print publication. This is because in 2008, our rival high school published an article about oral sex and mentioned 4 students by name that spoke about their own experience. The parents of the named students sued the school district, and the school district actually won since the reporters had clearly identified themselves and therefore had not invaded their interviewees' privacy. At this time, the publications in Puyallup were an open forum, but after this lawsuit, they were made into limited forums, and at the time, there were no legal standings to prevent the district from doing that.
They feel a lot of times that they're not being heard, or that they're not worthy of being heard, and I feel like this generation is so not only deserving of having their voices heard, but that there is so much power in those young voices.
The issue of the First Amendment in schools expands beyond just journalism. It affects student expression in general as well. On December 16, 1965, Mary Beth Tinker and Christopher Eckhart wore black armbands to school to show support for a truce in the Vietnam War, but they were sent home by administration. Mary's brother John did the same thing the next day and was sent home too. Their parents sued the school district for violating freedom of expression, and the court ruled in their favor. School officials couldn't censor students unless it interrupted the educational process, which this didn't. The court ruled that students do not shed their rights when they enter the schoolhouse gates. This was great until 20 years later, in 1988, students at Hazelwood East High School wanted to publish articles about divorce and teen pregnancy. Even though the names were changed, the principal did not approve of the stories, and they were censored at a prior review meeting. Writer Kathy Kohlmeyer took the case to court, but the court ruled in favor of the Hazelwood School District, saying that public school student newspapers are subject to a lower level of First Amendment rights.
This is something that I learned about in discussions with the Student Press Law Center. No administration should ever have prior review on an article, meaning that they should never be able to review the article before it goes to publication. I will say that I think probably with a high school paper, it would be useful for the advisor of the student paper to have maybe a closer relationship to the paper and making sure that they're abiding by journalistic ethics. I think when it comes to college paper, it's a little bit different, and there's no editorial control on behalf of our advisor. I would also agree that I don't think that a high school advisor should have editorial control over a newspaper. They should just have a closer relationship to make sure that they're keeping up their standards.
Today, the New Voices movement is working hard across the country to ensure students are not restricted by their administration. I can proudly say that Washington State is the 14th and most recent state to implement student expression legislation. Bill 5064 went into effect June 7, 2018, 1 week before I graduated. But the bill and the movement originates far before I started doing journalism, before I was even born, in fact. California passed the first student free expression law in 1977. This law not only gives students added protection against administrative censorship, but protects teachers from retaliation for students' lawful exercise of their free speech rights.
I covered New Voices for about 5 months, 6 months. I know that it's a national campaign to bolster and strengthen student press freedoms across the country, and some states have passed legislation, while others it's been a little tougher to get it through legislatures. But I think it's a really great campaign, and I'm all for it, and I think that the folks that are working on it, it's really amazing.
That basically undoes the damage of Hazelwood. It basically grants students their First Amendment rights for expression in their schools and empowers them to make the content decisions at their school with legal protection that administrators can't censor their work.
Throughout the following 40 years, 12 other states passed similar laws. In 2015, the North Dakota bill passed unanimously through the state legislature. My journey begins in 1992 when former Washington Journalism Education Association Chair Fern Valentine worked with the Student Expression Bill in Washington, not too different than Bill 5064, but it took decades of bills and trials until a bill stuck. Senator Joe Fain began the sponsor of the most recent bill in 2015.
You want to train journalists to be journalists, and it's not journalism if you've got somebody over your shoulder that says you can say this and you can't say that.
This bill was modeled after North Dakota's policy, placing responsibility on student editors to determine content as long as it's not libelous or illegal. It also protects advisors and administrators. Bill 5064 was introduced in 2017, where it cleared the Senate but not the House, and in 2018 it finally cleared both chambers for the first time. What made this time different? I'd say not just the new wording of the recent bill, but the sheer passion and dedication of everyone involved. The Viking Vanguard, which I spent 3 years of my life pouring my heart and soul into, is now a public forum for student expression. But there are still 36 states to go, and those 36 states have thousands of student journalists that are susceptible to censorship. And as the web and social media become more prevalent, the questions of privacy and free expression continue to beg questions. Perhaps the discussion of student press will never end, especially as student journalists continue to report on hard-hitting topics. But one thing's for sure, those that are passionate about student journalism aren't going to stop fighting.